Hello, Andrew Day.
Hey Bob,
How you doing?
pretty good. How are you doing over there in Princeton?
A little weary, but we're closing up the Nonzero Newsletter. We always feel good about that sometimes, and then sometimes we don't. But today we do, right?
Yeah, I think we got all the items done, so that's a good sign.
I wouldn't go that far, but they will be done before the newsletter comes out. We always insist on that order.
Right.
They will be done. And Andrew, something I think people don't appreciate about the Friday edition of Nonzero Newsletter is it really has like a lot of little items in it.
Hmm.
And the reason they may not realize that is because I argue and make what is a mistake of putting a kind of longish piece up top. But if that doesn't interest you, you scroll down, you see these little nuggets. It's a veritable smorgasbord.
It is, and we boldface kind of what would be the title of that item if we gave it a title, so you
If
could
we
kind of
gave it a
scroll
title,
and see what you find interesting.
right? So the little phrases within it are boldface for your highly efficient perusing, and we encourage people to check it out. And what I was thinking is if people watching this smash the like button, that will feed the YouTube algorithm. We'll get new people viewing this. They will follow our guidance and go look at the Nonzero newsletter, and we'll have like a lot of subscribers and we'll become highly influential. And the world will be a better place for it, Andrew.
It will, yeah. The apocalypse will be averted. That's one of our
Plus,
major aims.
no wars. No wars if they would just take our guidance.
Right. Maybe as a last housekeeping thing, we can also say we're doing a Zoom call next week for NZN members. So if anyone's interested in
Correct.
that, if you're a regular listener or if you have a free subscription to the Nonzero newsletter, getting a paid subscription will allow you to
Right.
receive the Zoom link and you can come to the AMA.
Mm-hmm. You can ask me anything, and then we're gonna do that for about 45 minutes and then talk about artificial intelligence. Some people
Right.
may not understand my fascination with AI.
Yeah. Although at the last AMA, a lot of people seemed interested in AI. So,
Yeah, and we hadn't even
mhm.
specified that wasn't even a defined topic. So yeah, so maybe there will be enthusiastic participation. So anyway, you're good before we get into the news of the week, or some news of the week, and then into the substance of the newsletter. Your Asheville's treating you well. Hippie
It
capital
is.
of the South.
I've had some bear encounters, pretty close one 2 days ago. And then we had these crazy storms. We had like a tornado warning near us, which means they spotted a tornado. And then we were in a tornado watch, which means the conditions are ripe for a tornado.
Hmm.
But yeah, all's good.
Tornadoes and bears, it's a perilous existence.
Tornadoes are pretty rare up here. I don't think they do well in the mountains. But we had like an 80-degree day coupled with golf ball sized hail. It was really bizarre.
You sure you're
So
not exaggerating here?
I'm
Golf
not.
balls are pretty big.
Look it up. That's what the news described them as being. Yeah.
Well, and of course, there would never be hype on the news, right? Because that doesn't lead to clicks and traffic and revenue. So they would never do that.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
But
But
we
yeah, you
wouldn't
wanna we
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 wouldn't
never
hype
do.
things. No.
No. But yeah, why don't we get into the newsletter? You wrote a lead about these protests and about some recent articles giving advice to the protesters. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, and I worry that, I mean, 3 times in a row, the first piece has been about the Middle East and Gaza in one sense or another. Um, and there is, I mean, but it seems to me like the news keeps coming.
Hmm.
And what the lead is about, or the protests, I mean, first I would say in terms of activity this week in Gaza, this is of course the week that Biden apparently, it was disclosed this week that he had told Israel he was cutting off some weapons, and that was because he didn't want them to do a full scale invasion of Rafah, and that was a whole new, exertion of leverage that many people had been encouraging for a long time. Um, and I want to talk about that a little, but first I would say that some people attribute that to the protests, that they think that that's what put him under enough heat to finally pull out the big guns. Now, how big will the guns be is a totally different question. Um, you know, people in Israel and some pro-Israel people in America complained that he had hurt Israel's bargaining position with Hamas in terms of a ceasefire, which of course Biden would like to get pronto, by disclosing that, he's kind of trying to put the brakes on. And so Israel can less credibly threaten a full-scale invasion of Rafah if Hamas doesn't do business with us. Apparently, the way it happened is Biden didn't want to disclose this to Hamas or anybody else. He told Israel privately. Then it was leaked by somebody in Israel, presumably to put domestic pressure on Biden, because obviously there's going to be a lot of blowback in America once this is disclosed. And that's probably the second reason Biden wanted to keep it quiet, aside from the tactical issue with negotiations with Hamas. And sure enough, first of all, the Council of Presidents of Jewish Organizations or something like that. Mike Kinsley, the great editor of the New Republic, who was editor when I was there, used to refer to the president of that council as the King of Kings. And it is a very important group of, pretty hawkish pro-Israel groups. I think they refused to admit J Street. Even though J Street is, pro-Israel by any reasonable definition. They're just not crazy. They're left of center. So it's a pretty hawkish group, a lot of groups, and they put the heat on Biden. This donor, I think he's a big Democratic pro-Israel donor. I think he's Israeli even. His name is Chaim Saban or something, Saban. He used to be the Saban Center at Brookings. And that was, back when Brookings had some real hawks there then. I don't think he donates to Brookings anymore, but he's been a big player in the American political world and think tank world. And he sent an email, I think, to some people and encouraged them to bring it to Biden's attention or something. But he brought the heat. And now it seems like already Bibi and his war cabinet is kind of playing chicken with Biden, because there was this report from Barak Ravid, this, I think, Israeli journalist who writes for Axios, saying that the war cabinet had approved last night, quote, the expansion of the area of operation in Rafah. And two of his sources says this doesn't cross Biden's red line about invading Rafah. One of them said it might. So we'll see. It's interesting to watch this whole power play out. And I tend to think Biden will ultimately back down. He has in the past. I mean, he's between a rock and a hard place. He's got the protesters and others kind of on the left on Israel, very vocal and contributing to a certain amount of disorder, which is a liability for him going into the election. And then he's got, on the right, on the pro-Israel kind of right, he's got like donors and various influencers and some voters, although that's not so much the issue as it is for Republicans with their Christian Zionist base. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, you get the sense reading this report from Ravid and Axios that Biden's red line does matter to the war cabinet in Israel. Like, they're thinking about it. Like, does this cross the line? So clearly he can have an effect. He has leverage if he wants to use it. At least it informs their decision making. Maybe the only other thing I'd add is, Biden's statements on Rafah haven't been quite as categorical, I think, as they've been presented in the media. I think the administration's position is more that if Israel goes into Rafah, there needs to be some sort of humanitarian plan to reduce civilian casualties, to make sure that there are places that they can go when the shelling starts and the ground invasion begins. Although it is true that he has used some strong language warning Israel against this invasion, because I do think they they've
Yeah.
determined, the Biden administration has determined that this will cause a lot of civilian casualties. And I didn't know that detail about him talking privately and then going public. I wasn't aware of
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Another weird thing about it was in the CNN interview where Biden made this announcement, he kind of phrased it as a warning, like if you go into Rafah, we're going to withhold the kind of weapons that you normally would use in that kind of combat situation. Um, but it turns out like, they already halted the delivery of these 2,000-pound bombs.
Hmm.
And the reasoning is totally coherent. I mean, Rafah is now like as densely populated as like Paris or something. So you
Yeah.
don't want 2,000-pound bombs dropping on buildings there. But mhm,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. The Rafa thing, I think, started off as possibly a slip of the tongue or just, you know, the red line started off with a journalist saying, "Are there any red lines? Is invading Rafah a red line?" And he
mhm,
said, Biden tends to respond like spontaneously and quickly. I think he thinks that's like just a good forceful thing to do.
mhm,
And he said, it is a red line, just quickly. You could almost barely hear it, but he clearly said it. And then you could see him trying to recalibrate and kind of back off because he said, "Now we will always be with Israel," or something, like Iron Dome will defend them. And then he said, "But if they kill another 30,000 people or something, well, shit, obvious. I mean, they can do the Rafah invasion without killing quite that many." Um, so I think, although it could get pretty ugly. Um,
mhm,
and so that was like a weird thing to go from saying you can't invade Rafah to suggesting that, well, my actual red line is 30 or 35,000, whatever he said, more dead Gazans. I mean, it was kind of typical Biden. It's just not super coherent. But then anyway, at that point, he was locked into the red line.
mhm,
Uh, Although the administration kind of tried to claim it hadn't been a red line. But then once this thing leaked that he had tried to play hardball with Israel and say, look, we're withholding the 2,000-pound bombs. We don't want you invading Rafah. Once Israel leaked that, presumably for these tactical reasons of putting domestic political pressure on Biden, I guess he figured, well, you gotta, I can't be seen back again. So he kind of publicly reaffirmed
mhm.
that, yeah, we're withholding them. We don't want. At the same time, the administration is framing it like, you know, a full scale invasion of Rafah, this kind of that kind. There's all these like adjectives. I don't know if they use full scale, but these various adjectives like make it unclear what the red line actually is, and give Biden enough wiggle room to say, well, we didn't mean the suburbs, and we didn't mean,
Right.
and on and on. So I don't know, but it's of course a mess because this is like the only uninvaded part of Gaza. Not that it hasn't been already hit heavily with a lot of bombs and stuff and buildings damaged, but uh, there's basically after this, everyone in Gaza is a displaced person. I mean, if they
Yeah.
really invade it, because every place else has had to be cleared out at least once, even though in some cases some people have returned.
Right. Yeah, that's the moment. And Israel's overall strategy has been, well, they kind of went in from every direction except for the border with Egypt, but the strategy was just to push people from the north down south. We
Right.
start on the north and push people, and now we're in the most southern, what is it called? Like a governorate um, of Rafah, and then Rafah City is where people
Yeah.
are congregated.
So we'll see.
Hmm. But
Anyway,
you want to talk
yeah.
about these protesters now? You had a
Yeah, I just did this thing, and I hope next week that the lead item won't be about this stuff. I mean, the last three have been, in one sense or another about it, but this was kind of revisiting the thing I did a couple of weeks ago, where at the end of the piece, I noted that Norman Finkelstein had, while at Columbia talking to protesters, he had suggested this very slight moderation of their messaging.
Mhm.
Like fine, safe from the river to the sea. Although I got the impression that he would rather they didn't, honestly, that he thought that was tactically suboptimal because it offends so many people, and some people think it means kill the Jews and so on. It has a number of downsides. But all he suggested, and this was misreported, a lot of people said he did say drop from the river to the sea. He didn't. He just said after that, instead of saying Palestine will be free, say the Palestinians will be free.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of rudely rejected that. As soon as he handed back the microphone, the woman, the protester in question, rather than say thank you or anything, immediately started chanting exactly what he had asked them not to chant.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I weighed in saying, I think he's got a point. I think some moderation of messaging would be nice, even more than he recommended. And get the anti-war thing back to the center of people's conception of what these protests are about would be good, I think. And anyway, then in the intervening 2 weeks, a number of my fellow boomers, I had mentioned Vietnam as kind of an example of something. We had a diverse coalition. There were lots of messages, but the common denominator was anti-war, and in the intervening 2 weeks, a number of my fellow boomers weighed in, a couple of them referencing Vietnam, but all of them encouraging one or another kind of tactical moderation on the part of the protesters. And these are people who are prominent, pretty prominent to begin with, and in a couple of cases, long-standing. Well, they're all long-standing critics of Israel, but in the case of Steve Walt, author of the Israel Lobby, and my friend John Judas, who I was a colleague with at the New Republic, he's been very critical of Israel for a long time, and then Nicholas Kristof was the third one who urged this moderation. So I did a little bit of a roundup, talked about what specifically they're recommending. John is going the farthest. I kind of kid John in the piece. He's like, he recommended that he wants him to replace Palestinian flags with American flags. Like, look, getting them to drop the Palestinian flags, that would be an impressive feat if you set out to do that and got them to do that. Getting them to replace them with a flag of the country that's supplying all the weapons that are killing all the Palestinians, I don't think so. But I don't doubt that. Look, I mean, what all these people are saying is you'd like to expand the receptive audience. And because it isn't just that you have these chants that some people take as, in a way that they are not necessarily intended, which I think is true of both From the River to the Sea and Global Intifada. But, it's the conception of it as fundamentally a Palestinian nationalist movement as opposed to fundamentally an attempt to stop the suffering in Gaza right now. And that's one thing I think all three of these people had in common in terms of messaging advice. So I riffed on that.
Maybe as a millennial, maybe I should play the role of millennials advocate on this, kind of responding to the boomers.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Though honestly, on a visceral emotional level, I think I have a kind of a more negative reaction than you do to these protests, at least to some of the videos I've seen. Even as I agree with their demands and think that the anti-Semitism of these protests has been wildly exaggerated to the point of like a moral panic. And even as I think they can have a positive effect, like the way they're going about things now. And that's kind of what I would want to say. I don't know that protests self-regulating in a way of like self-regulating their demands and tactics in order to like appeal to the median voter or persuade as many people as possible. I don't know if that's necessarily always the optimal way to move politics in the direction that you would want it to go. I mean, there's other things that protests can do besides persuasion. Like these protests have become a kind of icon of division within the United States and within the Democratic Party. I mean, I imagine when the UN, America's UN ambassador goes to the UN and kind of stands up to almost every single other country that's pushing for Palestinian UN membership or for a ceasefire, she doesn't really feel like she's representing like a united front, because everyone knows there's all this division in America. Palestinians know that. They might get some comfort and hope from seeing protesters like risking arrest, being arrested because of their moral outrage on behalf of Palestinians. And then I think that they can kind of move like their decision to be like explicitly like pro-Palestinian liberation. It can kind of move the Overton window, where I imagine there's a lot of conversations out there where people are saying, well, I don't agree with all these campus protesters, but I
Hmm.
do think America should be more even-handed on the issue.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think I mostly agree with you because I hear like conservatives in my family have a negative reaction to the protests, and it makes me kind of think, well, maybe this is suboptimal, some of this stuff.
Hmm.
But I don't think it's just persuasion that protests can do.
Yeah. So you're saying on the one hand, your kind of intuitive reaction is to be kind of put off by some of it. But
Hmm.
when you reflect on it, protests are not in the business of like winning elections or in the business of changing the climate of discourse. And yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's true. But one thing Steve Waltz said, and of course, he's an expert. On the Israel lobby is broadly construed to include like donors and APAC and all kinds of groups and politicians who are responsive to donors and so on. He said, uh, they understand how powerful the forces are that you're up against,
Hmm.
and and they are using like Congress. I mean, Congress is cracking down on speech on they're getting presidents to crack down on speech on campus, and so are some donors of the universities. um and and it's easier for them to crack down to the extent that the protesters are perceived as extreme. Now, a couple of things. First of all, I think some people would say, bring it on. It's like,
Hmm.
this is our strategy, heighten the contradictions. And I don't know, maybe they're right. Uh, and you are also right that even as they try to crack down on speech, and in some ways succeed, you can still be moving the actual Overton window outward.
Hmm.
That seems to be conceivable. Um, the other thing I'd say is, you know, I agree there's some truly off-putting things you see on video, but in general, online, I attach a grain of salt to stuff I see on video
Hmm.
because, of course, there's going to be extremists in any movement of any size, and of course, that's what's going to circulate on social media.
Hmm.
And that's the other thing they might say is, look, whatever we say, they're going to find a video of somebody saying something anti-Semitic, and it's gonna, I don't think that's right. I think there's some correlation between how many people are saying what and how easy it is for them to depict the movement as hateful. And look, there are a lot of intense feelings in the movement. Um, for people, especially not all, but some who have a kind of an allegiance by heritage to the Palestinian side, just as there are on the Israeli side. You know,
Hmm.
it's I'm sure you can find hateful things being said on both sides, but yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah, as far as the what you said about heightening the contradictions, the like bring it on attitude. I mean, this is like will probably convince more people of the existence and the power of the Israel lobby than Walt's book did, I mean, that sounded like kind of a criticism of his book. It's not meant to be. That's an important book that he and Mearsheimer co-authored. But you can really see it in action. And some of these bills coming out of Congress or being considered in Congress are totally ridiculous. Like, I don't know if it ended up making it into the lead, but this one from this Tennessee House representative calling on protesters. I think it's like if they've been convicted of a crime while protesting, being sent to Gaza for 6 months. um, Another
It's
congressperson from Tennessee, a Senator Marsha Blackburn, has a bill that would put protesters on the no-fly list if they've been convicted of a crime, or, and I should say, actually, in both cases, I think it's arrested for a crime, not convicted, or in this case, if they've been punished by their university. So there's kind of like this two-step where we had this anti-Semitism awareness bill that incentivizes universities to crack down on these protesters and punish them, because otherwise they might be in violation of Title VI. And then now, if they've been punished, they're on a no-fly list. It's called like the
right,
no-fly list for terrorist bill or something like that,
right.
like using the
Because you're
language of
you're aware of the
terrorism.
long history of liberal arts majors at Columbia blowing up airplanes in suicide attacks, right? Just happens
Right.
all the time.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense to do this, yeah. Um, no, I mean, I'm sorry. The politics of this country are just increasingly embarrassing.
Hmm.
Not only on that side. I mean, there's a lot of embarrassing stuff, but we
Yeah,
persist.
we do.
Oh,
Maybe it's about time for the overtime segment. How's that sound to
yeah,
you?
yeah. If paywall is too off-putting a term, it's the non-member exclusion wall.
It sounds much worse. I like it.
How about the
Um,
non-member punishment wall?
Beautiful, yeah. The moat.
And
Um,
the moat full of alligators where non-members belong. How does that sound?
Maybe we could just mention what we're talking about. We're going to talk about this article in Foreign Affairs advocating Cold War II with China by
Mm,
these kind of extreme China hawks, although not really so extreme compared to Republican sentiment generally. We'll talk about nuclear weapons in space and this clash between the U.S. and Russia and the UN Security Council about how to handle
we actually may
demilitarization.
hold that item for next week, but
Oh,
we
that's
can
right.
talk
Sorry.
about it if necessary.
Yeah.
Um, and there's the cool AI thing. I think it's good. This novel use of AI to do a kind of social science experiment
Hmm.
by getting the LLM to simulate these human beings. It's less crazy. It's more interesting than I thought it would be.
Hmm. Yeah, that was pretty cool. And we'll talk about this Apple advertisement that people are
Oh God,
freaking out about and a couple other things.
including me. I'm sorry, but anyway, we'll get
Yeah.
into that later.
Okay, so bye everyone. Go to the Nonzero Newsletter on Substack if you want to become an NZN member and get access to the rest of this conversation and others like it, and to the Earthling, the paywall portion of the Earthling.
Yep, you will get the immediate gratification of watching the rest of the conversation or listening. And you can set up your special podcast feed that gets all the overtime segments. Don't see
It's a
how you
good
can
deal.
resist.
Good deal. Okay.
Okay, so we are heading into overtime.
This was a free preview of Earthling Unplugged. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive audio content, become an NZN member at nonzero.substack.com.